1 minute of the Smooth Draws radio show, you're gonna feel terrible.
Welcome back to the Smooth Draws radio show with me, known as the Boss, which I'm okay with, I guess, since especially in Texas, that's what they seem to call me. Cigar Coop and Cigar Robbie. Gary Layden is home recuperating from a recent hospital stay, but he's doing well, folks, and he'll be back next week. And with the help of our smooth operators, our friends, fans, and followers, you've helped us become the fastest-growing cigar lifestyle radio show, and we deeply appreciate it. If you have a question or comment for Doc, Coop, Hangman, Cigar Robbie, Val, we got a big crew, and myself, send them all to us at info@smoothdraws.com, and we'll get to some of them on the air, and it'll be a lot of fun.
On December 5th, the cigar industry lost a true icon with the passing of Jose Orlando Padron, the founder of the Padron cigar brand. He passed away peacefully at the age of 91. And we'd like to read the following statement that was issued by the Padron family. It is with deep sorrow that we announce the passing of our father, Padron family patriarch and founder of Padron Cigars, Jose Orlando Padron. Jose Orlando had a favorite quote by Cuban poet Jose Marti. Men are divided into two groups, those who love and create and those who hate and destroy. Jose Orlando Padron was a man who loved and created. He built a loving family. He built an extended family of employees in Nicaragua and the United States whom he loved and respected. After immigrating from Cuba, he founded a small family business in Miami in 1964. He built it into an international company, creating one of the most respected cigar brands in the world. He built a legacy. He will never forget his simple roots in the countryside of Cuba and as a poor refugee in a new country. He was grateful to those who helped him in times of need and through his toughest challenges. It is why he remained humble and committed to giving back. He turned his gratitude into the Padron Family Foundation so he can help others the way he was helped. To quote one of Marty's favorite aphorisms, there are three things that each person should do during his lifetime: plant a tree, have a child, and write a book. Having lived and accomplished a loving life, Jose Orlando achieved all three. He loved his family. He loved his native Cuba and his adopted countries of Nicaragua and the United States. He loved God. He loved life. He loved a good cigar and sharing it with friends. He leaves behind his wife, Florinda, his children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and great-grandchildren, as well as his extended family of trusted employees and friends whom he loved like family. He spent years preparing us for this moment, and we carry on the traditions and lessons he passed on. We will strive every day to live like he did, carry on his name, and make him proud. Rest in peace, Poppy. So, there was some news over the weekend prior to this that Jose Orlando Padron was not well. We had a little bit of inkling of it in Charlotte because Mr. Padron's son, George Padron, was scheduled to do a big event in Charlotte, and he doesn't do a lot of events. And at the last minute, he could not attend that event because there was a family situation. So we knew it was something pretty serious. And then word started breaking when I woke up on Tuesday morning that he had passed away. And obviously you want to wait until you know. You don't want to ever report someone's dead if you don't know he's not dead. So once the statement came out, it kind of was reality at that point.
A sad day, and he will truly be missed, and he is not only the patriarch of the Padron family and brand, the top icon in this industry. What an impact. Let's talk about Jose Orlando Padron and reflect on his life and his legacy. I'll give you a little history. He has one of the truly amazing stories of an entrepreneur that followed his passion, made an amazing career and brand, and left behind an incredible legacy. His coolest story, and if anybody has ever read anything about Jose Padron or listened to any of his interviews, the story that he always tells is the one about the little hammer. And it's a very iconic story. The little hammer was a hammer that was given to him by somebody in Miami. I'm getting ahead of myself. When he left Cuba in 1961. He went to Madrid. There, he was pretty poor, and he was begging on the streets. Then he came to New York, and he was there for a couple of months before he went down to Miami. He became a gardener. He mowed lawns. Then that's when somebody actually handed him his little hammer that he still had to this day and became the symbol for him and for his company. He took that hammer, doing some carpentry work. He raised $600. That was the magic number. And with that $600, he started selling cigars at night. He would do his carpentry and gardening during the day and sell his cigars at night. He formed the company which became the Padron Cigar Company in 1964. And then in 1970, he opened up a factory in Nicaragua, and that's when he started going into Nicaraguan tobacco and such. But that hammer was the key to his success. Every Cuban American that would come to the United States would get $60. And every time he had to cash his $60 check, he felt like a burden on the government, and he was very anxious to make money. He did very soon afterwards.
You know, Nick, one reason why he wanted to save and get back in, he wanted to get back into the cigar business. I mean, he came from a family of tobacco. His grandfather, Damaso Padron, had come over from the Canary Islands. And, in Cuba, the family was in the cigar business. And, of course, when the revolution happened, the nationalization of the cigar business happened, and he lost everything. And, so he comes to the U.S., and, obviously it was his dream to kind of start over again. And that's exactly what he did, and that hammer, that's become the mantra of the Padron family for the past 50-plus years. I mean, it's on everything you see with them, and that they look back and they look at that moment as a defining moment for them as a family and going forward.
I take another look at it and what the Padron family has meant to this industry. And when he was really starting his ascent into the realm of cigar royalty, the one thing the Padron families taught us from a manufacturer standpoint is hoarding tobacco. And hoarding that tobacco to control your processes to make a short run or a better quality smoke, which at the time really wasn't happening because in the boom they were just taking his tobacco where they could find anywhere and just throwing it out. He did something different. And the other thing that they brought to the table, I mean, take away the Anniversario series, the 64, the 26, and then later on the 40th and the 80th. They did two things, actually, that it changed the realm of cigars that we know it today in North America. They brought on the advent of San Andreas tobacco. Yes, it was used before, but was it used at the great level that the Padrones took it? No. The other thing that they did was they brought the advent of the box press. He once said, why did you do a box press? Because those were the cigars coming out of Cuba that were the seconds or the after smokes that the Cuban nationals working in the factories could take home. But he brought it out as a superior cigar, and that's when he made those into his Anniversario line. And he changed it forever. He changed the way the box press, San Andreas, they've done so much for the industry. And, you talk about perseverance. I don't think there's another man that exemplifies what this country is about, sticking to your beliefs and having perseverance. I mean, talk about the bombings of the factory. Talk about, the ups and downs of this family. And, really the Padrones that are left today standing, they owe it all to Jose. And what he has done. He broke that back for 30 years, walking those streets in poverty to sell what they have now. It's truly amazing.
Robbie, you mentioned tobacco, and you mentioned, when he was working in Miami and he was starting to make his cigars and he was starting to catch on, he just couldn't keep up with demand. So he was really, another thing is he was one of the first people to start working with Nicaraguan tobacco. And eventually he had to move his operation to Nicaragua because he couldn't meet the demand. But, when we talk about Nicaraguan tobacco today, it's like second nature to us. Go back, 50 years ago, this was cutting edge, much like, the Fuentes, they kind of went and started exploring Dominican tobacco. This is what the Padrones did on the Central American and with Nicaraguan tobacco. I believe Mr. Padron has claimed he was one of the first to start working with tobacco from Ometepe. So that was just, that's an island in Lake Nicaragua there. So this is why we look at this man, and because today we probably wouldn't be seeing the influence of Nicaragua if it wasn't for Mr. Padron.
That's a good point, Coop. And the thing is, you bring up Ometepe, and that region is owned by Nestor Plasencia, but that was his alliance with the Padron family and that family to create what you have now in the Ometepe, and there's some great cigars coming out of that. But think about it. You just said 50 years ago. I'm telling you something. I had this discussion on my radio show in 2008 where there was a turning point from having Dominican and Honduras tobacco in the top 25 of all the top 25 cigars in Cigar Aficionado to when it came a bloom of Nicaraguan. So really, Nicaraguan, even though they've been manufacturing and producing tobacco for years, that realm, that bloom has started within the last, I'd say, 10 to 12 years.
You know, one thing that the Padrones didn't do is go down the path that most other companies did in forms of they didn't have a sales force. They have no brokers, no reps. And the other thing is Jose Padron really revered and he loved his country. And that brings me to my next point where he tried to mend some fences there. And, you know, he went to Cuba and he met with Fidel Castro.
Yeah, so, you and I talked about this before, Nick, and right. He really always had a great heart and a great belief, and he did. When he arrived on the shores of America, it was an epiphany. It was an opening. It was a rebirth. He never lost the love. He never lost the intensity for the island of Cuba, for what it could bring as far as the realm of tobacco. But once he landed on the shores of America, it was a new awakening. It was a rebirth. And so he opened up and he discovered new things. He discovered capitalism. We saw him going from walking the streets with a little hammer to feed his family to where that family ended up now. But he thought of himself as an attaché to go back to Cuba to educate and to give them the same enlightenment and maybe even shine that on Castro. And, the famous picture that I'll never forget, him putting that Padron in Fidel's front lapel pocket. And it wasn't to say, here's a gift for you, my friend. It was for him to say, look at what our people, look at what the Cubans can do when we flourish in the open epiphany of the capitalist market. That's how I saw it.
But it wasn't taken like that, Robbie. Back here, I mean, it had a polarizing reaction in the South Florida community.
That's right.
And true. That is true. They saw just the picture. They didn't understand the man, because understand that the Padron name in the Cuban heritage in that not small, but Miami community wasn't as it is now. I really, truly believe if that picture would have been taken and that whole scenario would have been taken in 2014, it would have had a different look on it. I really believe that.
It absolutely would. It absolutely would have, because I was thinking the same thing. And for folks who don't know, basically, when that picture when word got back to the States on that, it triggered a series of bombs that were planted at Padron factory, at the Padron headquarters in Miami. And Robbie, we were talking. I think there was something like 11 of these. Correct? It was a lot of them that happened.
Yeah. We've heard reports anywhere from 4 to 11. I know it's been a lot. Some of them were documented, some of them were not. And remember, the Padron family were embarrassed by these, obviously, so some of them that were not reported. And this family, I mean, we're not talking about a cigar maker, right? We're no longer talking about a cigar maker. I mean, we're talking about someone who's not impacted just cigars, but it's transcended that. It's the American story. It's something that we all need to believe in, because this man came to this country with nothing and the hope and a dream, and he built it, what we have today. It's something that we need to commend, really. And I'm not talking cigar people. I'm not talking about our subculture.
Even his son, Jorge, he said his father went to Cuba with the goal of trying to mend fences and help people. And in fact, a lot of his father's friends were freed from prison because of him reaching out. But it was obviously taken a little bit differently in Miami with the various bombings, but they overcame.
Nick, I have it on good report that I know for a fact that Jose Orlando Padron saw Coop smoking his cigar in his style and said, "What is that man doing with that cigar?"
Oh, he would have had. Could you imagine if he saw me doing that? He would have went, because he was a feisty guy. Let me tell you, he would have went.
Well,
Yeah.
we all have our memories of Jose Orlando, and if we could just share some. I have a couple of fond ones. I'd like to start. I first met Jose Orlando Padron in 2008, and I was interested in introducing the Padron line to the Middle East. Nobody there was smoking it. Very few people had even heard of it. At the IPCPR show that year, I sat down with Jose, and I didn't realize he does not speak, or he didn't, even then he spoke very, very little English, and I spoke just about zero Spanish at the time. But the most amazing thing that I took from that first meeting with him, we sat down, just the two of us on that couch, and he listened to me. How much of it he understood, I don't think much. But there was a connection that him and I had, and I want to believe it was because of our mutual passion. And I conveyed my message of wanting to distribute Padron cigars in the Middle East, and specifically in Saudi Arabia. And I don't know how far I got, but then Jorge came there and he said, my father says he's willing to help. And it was a great first meeting. I saw him years after, and my Spanish kept getting better and better. The same feeling that I got and had with Alejandro Robaina is the same with Jose Orlando Padron. It's this passion that just comes out of your pores. It's a common ground. I'll also miss him, and he was truly an amazing man. What about you, Coop? Tell us. I know you've met him several times.
Yeah, I'm not going to say he knew me, because he didn't. And I've met George several times. I've interviewed George several times, but I never interviewed Mr. Padron. My first meeting with him was actually at the 2010 IPCPR in New Orleans. And the way I kind of met him is I was actually over at the Drew Estate booth. And in the booth was Jonathan Drew, okay? And Jonathan was this was kind of funny. Jonathan was dressed in a suit with sneakers on. All right, so normally Jonathan's there with the baggy shorts or whatever, and the t-shirt. No, he's wearing a suit with but he's got his sneakers on there, right? And I wanted to go up and just kind of, I had already met Jonathan, so I was starting to get to know him at the time, and this was my first IPCPR again. And as I'm going over to him, I see Mr. Padron, Jose Orlando Padron, talking to Jonathan, right? And this is not and they're talking in Spanish, right? But this is not first of all, I looked at that moment, right? And I'm like, wow, I'm looking at the two generations here. These are the two most unlikely people you would ever see having a conversation. They're having a lively and happy conversation. And basically, in true Jonathan fashion, it was 15 to 20 minutes before I finally was able to go over and eventually, kind of introduce myself and meet Mr. Padron. 2 years later, I'm down at Smoke Inn at the Great Smoke, and once again, I see Jonathan and Mr. Padron again having a very lively conversation here. So, again, just seeing that, you kind of think he's old and set in his ways with Mr. Padron, traditionalist, but here he's talking to Jonathan, and the two had a very good friendship there. And Jonathan, who I've talked to, has nothing but wonderful things to say about Jose Orlando Padron.
How about you, Robbie?
I didn't really know him. I didn't know the family that much. I guess the only interaction that I had with him is I was working for A.J. Fernandez at the time, and I was leaving Nicaragua, the airport in Managua, and we were going back to Miami. And actually, it was just me on that flight from my company. And George had brought Jose Orlando, into the waiting area, and he was in a wheelchair, and they boarded him first. And as you can imagine, Coop, this is you're going back, you have Nicaraguan nationals going back to Miami or vice versa, and then you have a bunch of wetos like us in the cigar industry, and everybody going through first class, and I was about 3 seats from Jose Orlando. Everybody was giving their homage to them as they came on board. So when I got up to his seat, I looked at him, I said, "Hola, Mr. Padron." And I didn't ever forget it. His piercing eyes looked at me, and he just said, and I don't know why he said this, he said, "Hola, caballero." And that was it.
Well, it's been an interesting year. We've had some, passings in this cigar industry, legends. Avo Vazian, Carlito Fuente Sr. I mean, these are all masters of our trade, our industry, and our passion. Who are the guys that are taking the mantle to carry into the next generation? Any thoughts, guys?
Well, actually, I'll kind of start with another thought before that, because I think it's a really good question. Who right now is that elder statesman that cigar master elder statesman now that Jose Orlando Padron has passed away. And I was talking with Jose Blanco on this on Tuesday morning. He brought up Benji Menendez, who I think now kind of is that cigar master who's, in the golden years, so to speak, right now. And I think he's got that. But I think at some point, Nick, there's going to be someone who emerges and becomes that next great name. Yeah. So I think we're certainly looking at some people out there right now.
It's a crowded playing field, no doubt. But
it's a crowded playing field. It wasn't like one person in mind that I've had with that. I think someday we may see Willie Herrera certainly up there with the name. I think, but he's got many years ahead of him, I think, too, before he's going to get to that point.
I think the one person we cannot overlook, and we've mentioned his name twice, Coop, and you saw that the passing of the throne firsthand is, you can say what you want about Jonathan Drew, Jonathan Sands originally, but that is the man that I have to look to. I mean, he is the one that, remember, he slept on a floor for years in the back of a factory developing his craft. And when you talk to the Cuban blenders and the Cuban cigar makers, that's the one they turn to. Forget about the crazy suits, the crazy hair, the his idiosyncrasies. Think about what he's done and what he's meant to this industry. My hat goes to Jonathan Drew, and I think he's going to be probably one of the new era parents. He's changed cigars as we've known it for sure.
For sure.
Robbie, it's an interesting comment you made, because I was thinking, all right, not necessarily a cigar master, like I was thinking Willie, but 40 years from now, that story of Jonathan sleeping on the floor when he's now in his late 70s, right? That's going to be the type of story that people are going to be talking about, much like we're talking about the Little Hammer. So that's a great point.
So who do you think, I mean, for us aficionados, and I put that term to you loosely, who's changed it more? Acid, whether you like it or not, brought a lot of people into the cigar realm.
Well, guys, we could talk about this for a while. I just want to add it here before we go to break that the Padron family does run a foundation that supports a lot of great causes, health and education, building a school in Esteli. He wrote a book that was called Memorable Moments, I believe, published, and it was a great book. And Jose Padron, the patriarch of the Padron family, you are truly an inspiration to all of us in the cigar industry and the media. God bless. Well, you're listening to the Smooth Draws radio show with myself, Cigar Coop, Cigar Robbie. Coming up, we'll be clarifying as to whether one can still visit Cuba following Trump's recent executive orders. So don't go anywhere unless you want to go get a new cigar or start smoking a different one. We'll be right back. Smooth Draws.
Cuba is a destination that almost any cigar enthusiast would love to visit. Join Nick and Doc of the Smooth Draws radio show in Cuba for a 5-day educational and people-to-people exchange. The trip meets all government requirements and will introduce